Well, you know why you're here. You clicked on the link. This is obviously something you want to listen to, so let's get busy. This is what we're going to do. We're going to figure out how to make sure we put things together properly. One of the things I realized over the years of taking things apart and putting things back together is that we need to make sure that on the way apart, we stay organized. A technician will be taking apart many things, simple things, complicated things. When things get a lot more complicated, it gets a little bit more difficult. We want to make sure that we end up with the customer satisfied. And the customer satisfied is when their vehicle is put back together and everything sorts itself out. So, how do we make sure of that? Well, one of the things we need to do is get some basic habits. Those basic habits, upon disassembly, can help us a lot so that we can get that thing back together and get it on the road. I realized that there's a simple equation that we can use to make sure things get back together. And that simple equation is organization plus understanding equals putting it back together right. So we want to put it back together right? Yes, we do. So here's a few examples of what we can do to get better organized and better understand what we're doing. Let's look at an engine.
So you're going to need to know 3 basic words in order to remember how to take an engine apart. One is the word do. What does this part do? The next one is, what does it look like? What does this part look like? How does it different than other things? And then the third one is, how does it fit in there? 3 things. I've got a perfect example here. You can see I've got a small engine. This is our PowerFist engine. And we've got 3 very similar bolts sitting right here, and they hold the blower housing onto the engine. Now those similar bolts, they could all be the same, but they could be very different. Let's look at this one first. If we take a look at this bolt, you can see that it has threads on one end, and then it has a head on the other end, and this is just a shelf over here. So that's what that bolt looks like. Then we could look at this one here. We see something just slightly different. We see we have this little bushing right there, spacer, and then we also have a bolt, threads on both sides. The head of the bolt is over here, and the other one is over here. But they look a whole lot different when you compare the two to one another. They do the same job. However, they look a lot different. And if you take this one and put it in the place of this one, it won't work. In fact, it may damage the engine. So how do we make sure we know which one is which? Well, let's start with the questions. What does it do? Excellent question. What does this bolt do as opposed to this one? Well, the only thing that this bolt does when I look at it upon taking it apart was that I saw that it held on the blower housing and it held on the starter recoil. That's all it does. This goes all the way down inside, the parts fit on top, and that works great. But in the case of this bolt over here, if we look and go backwards a bit, we would see that the magnetocoil was attached to here. And this goes through the magnetocoil all the way down through into there. Now wait a minute, we also have another magnetocoil bolt, and that's this one right here. And this one looks totally different than the one over here. What does it do? Well, this one does several things. This one holds the magnetocoil onto the engine. It also gives the blower housing a place to sit on top and put a nut on top. So this does 2 things. What does it do? The next question is, what does it look like? Well, you can see obviously that these are different looking bolts. And you can see also that these 2 bolts are quite a bit different also. It's all about asking the question and noticing on the way apart so that you remember later. And the last one says, how does it fit? This is these bolts especially can be pretty confusing, and I've seen lots of students, they see the threads on this side and they see the threads on this side and they think, well, that's the same. It doesn't really matter. It does matter. How does it fit is important. So you take the bolt out and you ask yourself, how does this fit? Well, we need some space up here for the blower housing and the other components, And this shelf right here just pushes directly down against the block, just like that. So it has a specific way to go back on. Nothing is always just as simple as just putting in a bolt. You have to assume that you need to ask all of these questions in order to make this work. What does it do? And it may be more than one thing. What does it look like? How does it look a little bit different than the others? And how does it fit? Does it fit this way or that way? How does it go in? You need to make this a habit. Ask those 3 questions every bolt you take apart. And pretty soon, you're not even thinking about it anymore. You'll pretty soon say, yep, there's this one. I remember how I had to take that one out, and it's going to jog your memory later. What does it do? What does it look like? And how does it fit? Those are the most critical questions. If you ask those, when it's time to put it back together, you'll do a great job.